As I record this today in San Jose, the weather almost hit 80 degrees, so you know that summer is coming. And are you ready? Do you have your summer wardrobe ready, or is it just whatever you wore last year? Update your summer wardrobe with Quince. You can get 100% European linen shorts, shirts, and dresses from $30, luxe swimwear, Italian leather, platform sandals, and much more. The best part? Everything with Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than what you'd find at similar brands. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middlemen, Quince gives you luxury without the markup. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. I'll be breaking out that short sleeve linen shirt that I have pretty soon. And what will you get? Treat your closet to a little summer glow up with Quince. Go to quince.com/traveler for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you enjoy the Amateur Traveler podcast, you'll love No Fixed Address, a travel podcast that's your backstage pass to the world's hidden gems. For the past 3 years, hosts Michael and Vanessa have been living out of suitcases, trading a fixed address for street food stands. And for season 2, they're diving deep into food, not just what's on the plate, but the people, the places, and the stories behind it. Listen in on a midnight kitchen session with one of Colombia's most beloved chefs. Taste what top chefs call California Gold, ultra premium uni, hand harvested by the state's only female diver, and step back in time for a matcha ceremony with a tea master in Japan. Plus, hear from experts like Travel Channel and PBS host Samantha Brown on which destinations have shaped them and how to get the most out of every journey abroad. No Fixed Address is available wherever you listen to podcasts. And thanks to No Fixed Address for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. Amateur Traveler, episode 946. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about a gold mine and wood runners, indie music, farm to table, and a truck rodeo, Poutine and the Hudson Bay Company, as we go to Abitibi-Témiscamingue in western Quebec, or something like that. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about western Quebec. I'd like to welcome to the show Jennifer Doré Dallas from Chasing Poutine.ca, who's come to talk to us about a region of western Quebec. And I'm going to try and say it, and then she will say it correctly, but we're going to be talking about Abitibi-Témiscamingue.
Almost.
Almost. Excellent. Welcome, Jennifer, first of all, and then what's the region that we're talking about? Where is it, and why are we talking about it?
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's Abitibi-Témiscamingue. So let me say that slowly. Abitibi-Témiscamingue. So if you say it with an English accent, it would be like Abitibi-Témiscamingue. I know, it's a tongue twister.
And I believe we're only talking about it just to humiliate me, is my understanding here.
Pulling your leg a little. Everybody has a hard time. Even Quebecers sometimes get it wrong. So don't feel bad about that. In saying that, basically, it's in Quebec. So if you want to know where the region is, it's on the border with Ontario. So if you imagine the map between Quebec and Ontario, there's a lake. And that's basically the divide between the Abitibi-Témiscamingue region. It's northwest of the province. Most people don't really know about it outside of Quebec, but in our province, it's really well known, especially for nature. It's a paradise for nature lovers, and it's also very historical in the sense that we had log drivers and all our wood basically used to come from that region. And there's also mines. So we'll talk about all those things. I'll take you from gold mines to microbreweries, pristine lakes. Basically, you're off the beaten path. And that's what I love about this region is that everybody thinks it's remote, but it's so accessible and it's so easy to travel there. And it's also home to Anishinaabe communities, so basically First Nations. And it's full of culture, museums, restaurants. So it's not the remote location you would imagine when you see it on the map so far north from Montreal.
Okay. Excellent. What itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
I'm going to take you all around the region. So basically, if you're starting either in Montreal or Toronto, you have two options. I decided on the Montreal option for you today because that's where I'm based. We're going to go up through Abitibi, which is the first part of the region, and then go through the different communities, go back down into Témiscamingue, which is the second region, and back into Ontario. So you can either go to Toronto or Ottawa from there or come back to Montreal through that section.
Okay, so it's a road trip.
It's a road trip. You definitely need a car to visit Abitibi-Témiscamingue. It's definitely not a place where you can walk or bike to get around the region, but you can do that once you're in each city or each village.
Excellent. Where do we start?
Let's start off with a bit of setup where you have to imagine yourself going through 6 hours of driving from Montreal. So you got to turn on the music, relax, get ready for some driving, get some snacks, stop at the corner store for some chips. And then basically the adventure starts already through the Laurentians, which is a region you probably know. People know Mont-Tremblant, for example. And then you drive through that another few hours, you cross the whole Laurentians, and you get into a park that'll take you to the region. So it's an adventure before the adventure actually starts, and it'll bring you to the Gold Valley. So Val d'Or is the city we're going to visit first. And Val d'Or is...
So Valley of Gold.
Valley of Gold, exactly. Your French is pretty good. How's your French, by the way?
Well, my pronunciation could use some work, obviously, but...
Let's try Val d'Or. It's quite easy.
Val d'Or.
Oh, yeah, good. That's better than Abitibi-Témiscamingue for sure. It's easier to say. Anyone can pronounce it better. But basically, the region is well known for the trading company. Hudson's Bay Company started there in 1868 and farther north, obviously. But there was forts and there was a lot of fur trade with the Anishinaabe Nation. It's a region that has a lot of history and that most Quebecers aren't necessarily familiar with because for us, it's known as forests nowadays and lakes. There's up to 22,000 lakes. So there's a lot of fishing that can be done, hunting. There's a lot of stuff to do. But basically, the regions that are closer to Ontario were founded first. And then other colonization happened in the 1930s because the government here wanted people to go farther north because in the cities, everyone was poor. And so that created Val d'Or with the mining industry for gold and copper. So we'll talk about Val d'Or and Rouyn-Noranda, which are the two mining cities in the region. So let's go back to Val d'Or. That's the first city you'll hit when you come from Montreal and you go up. This trip, I haven't done it in a themed way. So it's basically for anyone that loves nature, culture, history. I'll be talking about different things from different topics and you can pick and choose what you want to do and decide that. So let's start with mining. Obviously, if you're in Val d'Or, you know about the city's mining past. And the first thing to see is really the Cité de l'Or. So basically the gold place to be. It's a museum now. It's an interpretation center and you can become miner for a day. So it's really cool. You get dressed up, you go down in a truck, 91 meters or 300 feet underground in an actual mine. Obviously, it's not a mine any longer, but it's really cool because you get all chilly and you're under the earth, basically, and you can see the life of the people that used to work there with no technology like we have today, no lights like we have today. So they had their lights in hand and walking through that. It's spooky, but don't worry, it's not a scary experience, but it's really fun to do whether you're a couple or alone or traveling with kids. It's really cool. That's one of my favorite experiences in the region. And I think it's a highlight. It's a bucket list experience you have to do in Abitibi-Témiscamingue. But if you're more into the museum side of things, like the historical mining, you could also visit that afterwards. And if you want to play around a little bit more, there's a geocaching activity. So you have a GPS receiver in hand and there's different things you got to find along the premises. So that's pretty cool too.
And we haven't necessarily talked about geocaching on the show. So you're talking about where you identify a GPS location, and in that location, you'll find usually some sort of small box or Tupperware or something else, and you'll take something or leave something or sign the notebook or whatever that shows that you found it.
Sounds like you've done it before.
I have done it before in Iceland.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's basically adapted for the kind of the interpretation center, easier than regular geocaching,
Okay.
because they want people to find things and learn things at the same time. But yeah, that's exactly what you described.
Okay. Excellent.
Besides that, a little bit further, there's the Bourg-la-Mac village. So basically, it's the old village in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, where people used to live when they worked at the mine, which doesn't sound super sexy when I mention it, but it's really nice log houses that were kept. And so people are still living there. It's still a living village, but it's really nice to go see and take photos. And you have an audio guide as well that you can listen to while you're going around town and seeing that. So it's a really funky little place, great place for photos as well. And it completes the mining experience with what you've just seen going underground. So I find that quite cool to see. And you get the information while you're in your car driving around.
Okay. And that's a living history museum, seems to be what I'm seeing.
Exactly. So you can't visit the actual houses because people still live there and they're owners of these houses.
Oh.
But from the outside, you get the experience and you can see them. Unfortunately, you used to be able to go in and there was a little interpretation center, but that's closed right now. We don't know if it's going to open back up.
Okay.
So we shall see. And then if you want to top it off with the cherry on top of the mining, you go to the museum in Malartic and you can actually go to a real functioning mine. So there's the geology museum and there's games and earthquake simulators and fairy stones, moon rock, and all the stuff you would find in a geology museum. But then you hop on a truck and you go out to the actual mine and you get to see a huge place where people are working and trucks are moving around. So it's
an open pit mine.
Exactly. So it's completely different from Cité de l'Or, the first site we went to. Instead of going underground, you're overground and you're just watching this. And it's really impressive. If you've never been to a mining site, it's quite the thing to see. So that's the trio I would recommend for the Gold Valley.
And the open pit gold mine that I've been was in New Zealand, and it was a huge mine. What is the scale of this? Is this one of the ones where it has great big trucks, but they look like little tiny Tonka toys? Or
I would say the medium in that sense. It's an important mine for Quebec, but it's not like the biggest mine at all.
Got it. Okay.
And beside that, there's a rotary tower. So it's basically a tower that you can walk up to get the view of the surrounding region, which isn't urban at all. You have the city, but you have a lot of greenery outside. So it's a bit of an outdoor paradise. And at sunset, you have a radio station that you'll put your car radio on and you'll get the music that comes from the rotary tower, even if you're not there. But the best thing to do is to go to the rotary tower and be up there for sunset and hear that music that'll play outside for you. And it'll take you through sunset and the region and the history as well of where you are and explain that to you in a musical way.
Okay.
I'm not sure
that I quite pictured what that means, but okay.
Basically, you go up a tower to see a view, but instead of just going up and down and leaving, at sunset, there's an actual radio station that plays something for you while you're at that station.
Okay.
So you can listen to it even if you're not there.
Sunset there has a soundtrack, is really what you're saying.
Yeah, I see you say it much better than I did. So it's a good way to top off Val d'Or. And it is well known as well for microbrewery and restaurants and chocolate. So there's a lot of places you can visit as well if you're into food. And you can stay there for the night as well or visit other little tiny museums. I won't go into super big detail about these, but if you're interested in like health, you can go see where they used to have a doctor's office and it's like a very historical 1950s doctor's office. So that could be interesting if you want to see all those objects. It depends what you're into, but that's always fun to see when they kept all the stuff.
Okay.
We're going to move on. Like I said, there's 5 regions basically that are divided up into cities and villages and little towns. But we're going to go off to the second one, which is Amos Arikana, or just the city Amos. It's probably easier to say for you guys. And we're going to change from mining to water. So basically, Amos is well known. Its water in Amos is so pure that they actually bottle it up and sell it to the rest of us.
Okay.
So it's very good water. And it's basically a place where you can learn about the eskers. So I'm not really good at geology, but it's fluvio-glacial formations.
Okay.
So basically, it's where the geology makes the water so pure because of the rock. And this has basically.
You're drinking old glaciers, is really what I'm hearing.
That's a good way to say it. Yeah, exactly. So basically, it's so pure that they've made a museum out of this and they've created different experiences. And even if you're not into water, I don't want to sound like you have to be a geology nerd to love this. It's really just cool to go and see this because it explains how we get our water. And most people haven't visited a city well in the past. At least I hadn't before I went there. So it's really cool to see. And Moment Factory, a company you might know that's from Quebec actually and creates really immersive experiences, created a multisensory experience with the Indigenous community in Amos, which is called Picogan. So the community is Picogan. And together, they created this immersive experience where once you're done visiting the well, you'll be taken through all of this with the theme of water and the deep respect for nature that the community has. So you're basically taken along rivers and waterways in a really fun sensory way, which kind of spices up that's not necessarily an experience that is as sexy as maybe other museums, but it's a really fun thing to do. And you do it at night too. So the light really, you can see the experience so much better.
And I'm also seeing, if I'm in the right place, that this is an area that has a regional festival, a powwow.
Most Indigenous communities have powwows, at least in Quebec, most of them have it. It's generally in June, but it changes from one community to another. There's 7 communities just in the Abitibi-Témiscamingue region, and Picogan is one of them. Theirs is about mid-June, the powwow, and that's, if you've never been to a powwow, it's a celebration you really have to see. It's so colorful and really nice, but it's also really important culturally for them. So it's time for us that we're not part of the community. We can go in there and learn more about their lives and about their history and culture. So it's a really cool thing to see if you've never seen one in your life. I really recommend it, whether it's with Picogan or other communities. If you're here in June, it's a great thing to do.
Cool.
The star of Amos, once you've gotten past the water thing, is Refuge Pajot. So basically, Pajot Shelter. It's a shelter for injured, sick, or orphaned wildlife. So basically, if someone calls in that an animal was hit but is still alive, or if they just found them in the wild without a mom, for example, Refuge Pajot takes them in and they'll try to return them to the wild. So they keep them as long as they need to, and then they try to put them back. If they can't, they'll keep the animal for its lifetime and give it a good life in this shelter. So it's not a zoo. It's not a place where the animals are there to be seen in that whole zoo way. I'm not a big fan of zoos, if you haven't guessed it, but it's a really cool place to actually see local animals like moose, wolves. There's deer as well, raccoons, all kinds of birds. And there's the famous Chewbacca porcupine. So Chewbacca is like the spirit animal of this place. He walks around with his keepers and he couldn't be returned to nature. So Chewie is the cool animal that sticks around and you can see him along your visit. But most of them are going to change. So every time you go, it's different. Sometimes there'll be moose, sometimes not. And so it really depends on what's happening and what birds or animals they've taken in. So it's a really cool experience as well to learn more about Quebec wildlife. So if that's something you could be interested in, you could either visit it for a few hours or you could even stay on the premises. They have little cabins that you can rent as well.
And this is the Refuge Pajot?
Pajot. Yeah. Place, wrong pronunciation.
That's okay.
Another place while we're going along to the next region would be Mielerie Grande Ours. So it's a meadowy, and it's basically where they make honey. And there's another bucket list experience that you should add if you like learning about nature and animals and bees. It's the beekeeping safari. So I'm not promising anything like Africa. Okay. It's not that kind of safari, I promise. But it's basically a safari through the grounds of the Mielerie Grande Ours. And they'll teach you about beekeeping and you'll get the whole experience. And you're going through that in a bit of a travel safari fashion. I won't say all that you'll be doing because I got to keep some surprises for when you actually go. But it has a really good end as well with cocktails and mocktails. So in the past few years, they've opened up a little restaurant on the side where you can have really good drinks. So, anything from...
And are they mead drinks inappropriate with honey?
Absolutely. So they have the beekeeper's
meadery.
mojito. I said meadowy, right? I didn't pronounce it. Sorry. It's mielerie in French, and I didn't know the English word before I actually translated this, so I didn't say it right. You're right. Meadery. Sorry. Thanks for correcting me.
That's okay. You correct my French. It's a even thing.
Yeah, good exchange. So yeah, they have ready-to-drink products. You can buy like cans to go, but you could also drink it there. And so beekeeper's mojito, they have like hops and summer honey drinks, they have gin as well. So it's transformed the place in a whole 360 experience where you go out and see the bees, but you also come back and then you can have a little break and a little snack before you move along.
Okay.
If you're into bees, you're probably into insects. One of the places it's a little surprise for me in Amos was the Labyrinthe des Insectes. So basically insect labyrinth. And Tommy, the owner, is super passionate, and he's probably the only person in the world that has ever gotten me so close to a tarantula. I'm not a fan at all of snakes and itsy bitsy things, but this place is really interesting, especially if you're with kids, but adults will love it as well because you can get so close to the insects in a non-museum-y way. So there's a labyrinth outside. You can go out and see the insects in their environment, in nature, but you come inside and Tommy will show you all these different insects and explain what they do and what they are. And then you can go up from there to the tarantula, which if you get there, I'm really proud of you because I couldn't, it was close to me, but it couldn't be on me. That was my limit. But some people will actually play. I say that in a nice way. Obviously, they're not throwing the spider around, but they will have the spider on them and they learn basically to manage their fears. So if it's something you're not super comfortable with, I really recommend you going there because Tommy has a way with us of just making us feel comfortable and he won't rush it on you or put the spider on you or anything. So don't worry about that. He really goes with what you're comfortable. And that's what makes it fun because everybody can have a good time, whether you leave them in their little enclosures or you take them out and really look at them from up close.
Okay. Summer is just around the corner, and the folks at Mint Mobile have a hot take. Getting a summer bod is out, and getting your savings bod is in. This spring and summer, we want skimpy wireless bills and fat wallets. And with premium wireless plans for just $15 a month, you can have both without breaking a sweat or the bank. Mint Mobile uses exactly the same towers on the nation's largest 5G network that I was using before switching to Mint Mobile. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text. Say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you. This year, skip breaking a sweat and breaking the bank. Get your summer savings and shop premium wireless plans at mintmobile.com/traveler. That's mintmobile.com/traveler. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. And thanks to Mint Mobile for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
All right, here we go.
New Phineas and Ferb is here.
We're back, baby.
For 104 more days
I know what we're gonna do today.
of summer vacation.
I am ready for summer shenanigans. Let's do it. Oh, yeah.
We're gonna bust Phineas and Ferb once and for all.
Are we gonna do this again?
New inventions, shenanigans, innators, adventures, and songs.
Brand new summer vacation.
New Phineas and Ferb starts June 5th on Disney Channel and next day on Disney Plus on DisneyPlus.Disney.com.
So let's move on to the third region, which is Abitibi-West, so basically the western part of Abitibi. This place has a little bit less to offer for tourists or visitors in the sense that there's not as many attractions or official places to visit, but it's really well known for outfitters. So like I said, 22,000 lakes, you can imagine the whole region has a lot of fishing going on and people will really want to go outdoors and play. I'll speak of national parks a little bit later on as well. So this region is really good for that if you're interested. And I've selected 2 places I think you really should visit. One thing I didn't mention, just so you know, it's about an hour between each of the regions I'm talking about. So like the cities that I mentioned.
So we're doing a big drive at first, but then not so much during the rest of the trip.
Exactly. It's a big region, but I would say like what you can actually visit and what's developed is not that far apart. So when you go from Val d'Or to Amos, that's about an hour. And then from Amos to West, Abitibi-West, that's another hour. And then you'll see every time it's an hour. So it's easy. I don't need to say the exact times. It's pretty much an hour between each of the 5 MRCs, which MRC is a regional county municipality, which is a cool name we have around here for those regions. But mainly you're going into the main city of these 5 regions.
Okay.
So let's track back to Abitibi-West. Here you're going to be in nature more. The city La Sarre is much smaller. So there's a few restaurants and there's a few little B&Bs and hotels you can stay at. But I would really recommend just spending the day there and maybe moving on to Rouyn-Noranda, which I'll talk about next afterwards. So it's probably the region where you'll spend the less time in the whole Abitibi-Témiscamingue.
Okay.
Not that I don't love it, not that it's not worth it, but there's just less, there's no museums and things like that as much as there is in the other towns. So let's start off with its best museum. It's École du Rang 2 d'Autier. So I'll translate that, no worries. It's the second concession road schoolhouse of Autier. So Autier is the village it's in. And basically it's an old schoolhouse. So you might have visited old schoolhouses. Everywhere we go, there's some little schoolhouses that are kept along the way. This one is really funky because you get to be a student at this school. So when you walk in, you sit down, and I can hardly manage to sit down there because they're so small, those desks back in the day for the kids. But it's really fun because everybody sits down, and then there's the actual teacher that comes in and they tell us about their life back in the day and 40s, 50s. And this schoolhouse is divided obviously between where the teacher stayed and where the students studied. So they take you through like little exercises and ask questions and see if you can do your arithmetics. And so it's quite fun. It's like a show basically, but in an unofficial way. So it really depends on questions and interactions with people. So that's a fun thing to do as well. And we're still in the history theme, right? Like I said, this region is well known for the basis of what Quebec is today. So basically people that were super brave and went out north and created a town, created a village from nothing, basically just cutting down trees. So this was one of the schools that these people would have sent their kids to.
Okay.
And then the next one is along the same themes. It's basically walking right into the 50s. It's the Turgeon House. So Turgeon House is an old, I would say a typical house from Quebec with a balcony in front, cute little house that was transformed into a museum and interpretation center. And the owner there has collected all kinds of stuff from that, I would say from the 40s to the 60s. And it used to be the municipal office. It was the postmaster's house, a general store, the bank. So basically it's been many things over the years. And he's gathered all kinds of stuff from all those things, and you can go see and play with those objects, which is funky because sometimes you're like, oh, what is that? What's that used for? And so you'll get all the explanations from this in the house. And it's not like a stuffy museum. It's really meant to be seen and touched and for people to ask questions. You can bring kids there, or you can just walk around and talk about when you were a kid and just see things that your grandparents had in their house. And it's quite impressive to see how they survived back in the day before internet and iPhones. So it's a really cool visit. Because we did survive back then before these. Nowadays with podcasts and everything, I don't think we'd survive long in one of these houses, but hey.
You would have had radio, so you would have had audio entertainment just on a more fixed schedule.
Yeah, so you'd have been super popular back in the day. The amateur travel podcast would have been on every night and you would have listened to that by the fire. It would have been perfect because this region had probably only radio and it was quite far back in the day because they didn't have the roads they have today. Now it's a beautiful highway, as beautiful as Quebec roads can be, but it's a beautiful highway. Our roads are a little complicated to drive on sometimes after winter, especially there's a few potholes you might experience, but it's very easy to go anywhere that I'm talking about today. You're just a regular car. You don't need a truck or anything. And if they're not paved, the roads are really easy to drive on. And so you don't have to worry. It's a very secure and easy place to plan a road trip to.
Okay.
Ready for the fourth one?
Sure.
Let's go to Rouyn-Noranda. So you want to pronounce that one?
No, I don't.
So Rouyn and Noranda were basically two different cities until 1986. And they joined together and created one city, which is Rouyn-Noranda. And it's also the name of the region, the MRC. So MRC, like I said earlier. From a political municipal standpoint, it's called an MRC. So Rouyn-Noranda is the big city of Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Like most people in Quebec, if you say Abitibi-Témiscamingue, they're going to be like, oh yeah, Rouyn-Noranda. That's probably the city people are going to think of. And it's well known because they found copper there. So obviously we go back to the mining thing, but don't worry, I'm not going to be talking about mining this time. We've done that in Val d'Or at the beginning. So Rouyn-Noranda is more of the urban treasure. So you have like really good restaurants I'll touch on, and you have museums, but you also have festivals. So a lot of the culture in the region is known there by other people because of the Festival de Musique Émergente, so emergent music festival. So basically like little bands that people don't necessarily know about or that are very local. They come to this huge festival in August, at the end of August, in Rouyn-Noranda, and it's a major indie music event. Most people have heard about it if you're into indie music and you follow what's happening in festivals. Personally, that's not my thing, but a lot of people love it. And I was there actually this year in August during the festival, and the city is taken over. It's crazy. Everything's rented out, no hotels. So if you're there in August, at the end of August, make sure that you book ahead because the city really transforms and you'll see all kinds of art in the streets and music and lights and all kinds of things happening. So you can just walk around and really feel the vibe. I would say that's basically what Rouyn-Noranda is. It's a vibe because if you go there and just drive through it, it's just like any other Quebec town. It's not anything special. But if you actually just relax and stay there and go to the museums and go see all these funky places and restaurants, then you'll really experience it because it's the people that are, I would say, very progressive and funky and alternative. So that's what I love about Rouyn-Noranda, is it's different from the rest of the region.
Okay.
One of the things I would visit from there is the National Park Aiguebelle, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. So just remember that if you're based in Rouyn-Noranda, it's easy to go to the park from there, but we'll talk about it in the nature section in a few minutes. You can also, right in town, rent a bike for free, and you just have to give your card and they'll give you a bike, and you can go around the lake. There's a big lake in town, which is called Osisco, and the Recreo Osisco company just rents out bikes and you can go all around the lake. You could also walk it if you wanted to, but it's a bit longer, so it depends on the time you have. But it's a really cool, refreshing thing to do because you're right in the, I have air quotes here, big city of Abitibi-Témiscamingue, but you're close to nature and you can take a break by the lake, have a little picnic, grab things at the coffee shop, and then go to the lake and relax. So it's a good combination of both. So if you're going to fly into one place, it would be Rouyn-Noranda, like I said, the urban region. I'm doing the air quotes again of the big city. And it's a really good place to base yourself and explore if you're not necessarily going to do the whole week road trip. I would recommend staying at least one night in this city, maybe two, depending on what you have planned. If you're going to the national park, I'll touch on later. So if you're staying only in this region, plan at least 3 nights to really take in everything that Rouyn-Noranda has to offer. But if you're driving through, it would be, I would say, a day on this 7-day road trip. I've been doing a lot of history. I know we talked about mining. We talked about the 40s and 50s. There's another historical place in Rouyn-Noranda that you really should visit if you're interested in historical stories and souvenirs and seeing how our grandparents lived. So that would be the Du Moulin General Store. So like Du Moulin, if I would say it in English. It's an old general store in a log house right by the water. It's actually right beside the bike rental place. And so you can do both in a really easy fashion. And when you walk in, you're like completely taken to a different era. It's all the old cans of soup and all the washing products in boxes that you haven't seen for ages. And so it's a museum, and they'll take you through all the different phases of this museum, and you can visit upstairs as well, like the rooms of this old general store that the people who had it lived upstairs, and they kept everything. And it's a really cool thing to do, but it's also really fun because the people who work there really love working there. And so they're going to make some jokes about history, and they'll show you the cans and things like that. And it's really a good animation. So the people that are there are really fun, and it's a really good way to be taken into history if you haven't visited the previous ones I talked about in Abitibi West. So it's a kind of a mix. Sometimes for a lot of people, 7 days of these historical places might be a lot. So you can pick and choose from what I'm saying, depending on what you're interested in. But if you're in Rouyn-Noranda, this is the historical place to go to.
Okay.
One of the quirky things I want to touch on before getting into food is the Russian Orthodox Church. So you wouldn't think in a Quebec village or city that you would see an Orthodox church besides Montreal. But actually, Abitibi-Témiscamingue had a really big influx of Europeans and Ukrainians, mostly in the past years. I would say like in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and right up to the 70s. A lot of people came to work, whether it's in the forest industry or mining industry, and they created communities in Rouyn-Noranda, for example, and that's where the Russian Orthodox Church comes from. So it's a little bit quirky when you're going around it. You don't expect it, and then boom, this church out of nowhere. The typical Orthodox churches with the little bubble on top. I don't know.
Onion domes, yeah.
Onion dome, thank you. I didn't know what the proper name for that. So it's really cool to see before you move along to have a good meal at one of the restaurants.
And that seems to be right next to the general store?
Everything is quite close, to be honest. Like you could walk quite easily or bike. It's not right beside it, but it's not too far, a few streets down. Rouyn-Noranda, like I said, is the urban metropolis of Abitibi-Témiscamingue. I think locals would laugh hearing me say metropolis. It's the big city, and it's really well known for its food. And one thing you need to know, if you haven't been to Quebec, you maybe haven't heard this, but we love food. Our French history as well brought a lot of gastronomy and good food to us, but Abitibi-Témiscamingue does it really cool too, in a way that mixes our old influences with the people who had nothing and were living in the forest. And the colonization times, it was really hard to get food or even all the essentials. So they got really original. And then nowadays, the mix with the modern food and all the foodie things like the microbreweries and things like that. So there's a really good mix of these two worlds in Rouyn-Noranda with multiple restaurants, like from steakhouse to a Thai restaurant. My favorite would be 2 par 4, which means like 2 by 4. Wood reference, obviously. This restaurant is like a bistro, but they do all kinds of funky things. Like you can have a bloody Caesar, but there'll be like a huge slice of bacon on top, which is always good because bacon is always delicious in any country. And then they'll do really like big poutine. So you probably heard of the famous Quebec poutine, which is fries with gravy and cheese curds on top. So they do really good poutines, and they have like funky, huge burgers. And their desserts are really inventive. Like they fried a Mars bar with ice cream on top and then funky stuff. So the 2 par 4 restaurant would be one that I recommend and really love.
And you mentioned poutine. Before I had been to Eastern Canada, I had heard of poutine, of course, and the fries and the cheese curds and the gravy and such. But I didn't realize that in some places they go a little nuts, and there are all sorts of varieties of poutine. I've seen Thanksgiving dinner poutine. I've had barbecue beef poutine. So is this the traditional poutine, or it's poutines?
It's poutines with an S. I mean, it's poutine is a religion in our province, right?
Okay.
Like, and if you tell Quebecers that you've had poutine outside of Quebec, they're going to be, no, you haven't had poutine, because we have poutine, right? It's our thing. And poutine is good for lunch, just as it's good at 3 a.m. for a hangover cure. So it really depends on what mood you're in. And there's the traditional one, like the typical one, just the cheese curds and the gravy.
Squeaky cheese curds.
Squeaky cheese curds. Yeah, they have to be squeaky. If you have grated cheese, that's an offense. It's so offensive to see grated cheese on a poutine. And the curds have to be really good. And so Poutine, anywhere you have it, you can have the typical one. But a lot of restaurants, like you said, have spiced it up.
Kind of
And
nouveau cuisine.
yeah, we even have a festival in Montreal, Quebec City, and other little towns. Beginning of February is the Poutine Week. So that's how crazy about poutine we are. In Abitibi-Témiscamingue, you can have poutine in every greasy spoon place. They have poutine everywhere. This Deux par Quatre restaurant does it in a more modern way. So they have, it changes, the menu changes.
Got it.
You can have like funkier poutines, whether it's bacon or onions or different stuff. So it always changes.
Okay.
Another place I would recommend is Le Saint-Exupéry, and that's a brunch place. So if you're into breakfast, I said I loved bacon, so obviously I love brunch. You gotta maintain those curves in life. And Saint-Exupéry is like the place to be for brunch. Arrive early because everybody goes there, especially on Saturday and Sunday morning. It's the place to have breakfast at, and it's a really good restaurant right on the main street in town. So before you head off for your next day, the next part of Abitibi-Témiscamingue, make sure to catch some really good brunch at Saint-Exupéry.
Okay. The one question I have here, I want to pause here for a second. And obviously, some people who are English speakers are going to be looking for the show notes here where I've found all the different places you're talking about because we can't necessarily parse as quickly what you're saying. And that's fine. That happens. But it does lead me to the question of sometimes when I'm going to web pages for these sites, I'm seeing only French. And so how much, if I'm not a French speaker, if I've even forgotten what I learned in high school, now that I've left the big cities of Montreal and Quebec, is that going to be a disadvantage or am I going to be using my translation app?
I'm not going to lie, it's not Quebec or Montreal. If you're coming to Montreal, don't worry. Everybody speaks at least a little bit of English. Quebec City, a little bit less, but Abitibi-Témiscamingue is more French, obviously. But in the tourist places, most of them have things in English either written down or they'll have somebody that can interpret and translate stuff for you. So you don't have to worry about most of the museums and most of the interpretive historical centers I talked about. But on the street and like in a cafe and things like that, most places will be French forward in the sense that they'll probably think you speak French and then you'll have to tell them that you don't. And then the person will switch to English. And that level of English will be different. So it's you're not going to get Montreal English in most places, but a lot of I would say people under 30 have all learned really good English. The wait staff and things like that. The younger they are, the easier it is for them to speak to you in English, but it won't be perfect. A lot of people will get by.
My
and
English isn't perfect either, so that's okay.
Yeah, no, mine either. But most people will be French speakers and have a little bit of English. In some places, you might have a hard time getting by if you're outside of the cities. But I would say don't worry about it because most people, just us in Quebec as Quebecers, there are English Quebecers and there are French-speaking Quebecers. I say English, but it's English-speaking. And so for us, we know there's people of another language. So whether you're a tourist or just another Quebecer, it's the same for us. And people will welcome you. And you don't have to feel bad that you don't speak French. When we go to other countries, it's all the same thing. So basically just see it as going to a complete other place and you learn merci for thank you or bonjour for hello. But besides those little polite gestures that you can do by learning a few words, you really don't have to worry about it.
The other question I have is for those of us who've been to France, where obviously they also speak French, strangely enough, although they would not say that you speak French, but that's a whole nother thing. Does it have the same sort of cultural similarities where, for instance, in Paris, if you walk into a shop and you don't greet the owner with bonjour, you're going to get a different level of service that's expected in France. Although it's the same language, is it the same culture and norms?
I would say no. That's a fast answer, but I would say like the Quebec culture is a bit less stuffy than the French culture. And I had a French fiance for 13 years, so I'm allowed to say this, but it's quite different. People here will appreciate it if you say bonjour. They will appreciate the effort, but it's not as snobby as in France where you have to do it. Obviously, anywhere you go in the world, I would recommend learning a few words. And I think that's an international, just being polite, but it's not at all the same culture. People are welcoming a little bit more than in certain parts of France, I would say. And our culture is quite different. We know the French culture because we've seen it in movies, and there used to be a lot of French culture that we had access to versus the American one, but they don't know ours. Like you said, it's a political thing where France doesn't necessarily know Quebec, and they would say our French is not French, but it's actually the old French. We've stayed closer to the old French. And in Abitibi-Témiscamingue, you're going to see some really cool accents. Like you're going to hear stuff, even if you do speak a bit of French, you're going to be like, huh? People have a different accent than in Montreal or Quebec City. So get ready for a lot of different things going on in your ears. Even if you do speak French, you'll see it's quite different.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks, or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Visit USAA.com/bundle.
Bundle savings are off total premium, not available in all states or in all situations. To qualify, auto policy must be active prior to property policy issue, subject to change. Restrictions apply. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
Excellent. Excuse that little interruption there, but you were going on to, I don't remember where.
I was going to Témiscamingue, so the fifth section of Abitibi-Témiscamingue, which the name comes from, Témiscamingue. In Algonquin, the word Témiscamingue means profound waters. So if you really can't pronounce it, just say the profound waters place. Nobody will know what you're talking about, but at least you won't scramble Témiscamingue. Believe it or not, English people can pronounce it because it's right on the shores of Ontario and Lake Témiscamingue or Témiscamingue. So you just have to get used to pronouncing it. It'll kind of come naturally to you after a few days. But this last region is, like I said in the beginning, the first place where people went to during colonization of the province. So the first transactions of the Hudson's Bay Company with the fur trade were here. And the first wood running, like you probably heard of wood runners. Do you know what that is? Okay. So basically a coureur des bois, which translates to runners of woods, which is a bad translation, but basically wood runners are people who would walk on the wood that was floating on the rivers and bringing it down. So I know different countries have different words for that, but here we say wood runners because they would literally run on the beams to survive. And they would do this winter, summer, spring, fall. Sometimes there was ice and the wood would get all caught up in the ice, and it's pretty impressive to see these people just like running on the beams that are in the water and just floating down. So a lot of history in the region started here, and this is where people moved to in the first place. But what's interesting is that Témiscamingue, in my opinion, has remained the most authentic part of Abitibi-Témiscamingue. They're all great and they all have really cool stuff to do but Témiscamingue is the nature place and the historical place, but it's not the big city at all. It's all little villages. It's not like one place. In the other Amos, Rouyn-Noranda, even Abitibi West are all in one spot, and then you'll radiate around that. But Témiscamingue is more like of a big region where you'll have to drive around to different towns to see different things. So it's quite different from the rest. And internally, some people say it's like a whole different region. It's different from Abitibi. So there's a divide, but it's nothing political or nothing negative. It's just there's Abitibi and then there's Témiscamingue. And that's the region that less people go to because for us Quebecers, it's less known than Rouyn-Noranda or Val-d'Or. And the mining industry has brought a lot of people to these towns, and these towns have become cities. So it's quite different. Whereas Témiscamingue remained very rural, and there's a lot of farms and agriculture, and it's quite different. So if you want a quiet, green place, I would say that would be the place to be. And it's also the place that, most Ontarians will visit because it's right on the border with Ontario. So if you want to go to North Bay, for example, or you want to go to Toronto or Ottawa after, you could create a little road trip out of it with Témiscamingue and not necessarily go to Abitibi or do the 7-day road trip like I'm talking to you about today.
Okay.
So here we go again with the super cool festival. This one's a bit weird. I talked about the Poutine Festival, but we have the Truck Rodeo Festival.
Okay.
Can you imagine that? It's basically in Notre-Dame-du-Nord, so that's the city it's in, but it's a huge gathering. Okay, there's thousands and thousands of people that gather with big rigs to do truck drag races and all the heavy-duty semi-trucks. And it's basically like a Formula One, but for 18-wheelers. Yeah.
All right.
I'll let that sink in.
Yep.
You can imagine like the big trucks and the poutine and the music. And it's basically the truck rodeo is a really big thing in this region. No worries, though. If you're not into trucks, you don't have to go. But it's a quirky thing to see if you're there during that time. The dates are not out yet, so I can't tell you the exact dates. But it's a really cool festival if you want to see the local culture. Most people there are probably not going to speak English, but it's a really cool festival to see in Témiscamingue while you're there. So that's an introduction, but don't worry, I said it was a calm green place. So let's move on to other stuff like the Foodie Festival. So in Ville-Marie, they have La Foire Gourmande, which is a foodie fest. You can imagine like a fresh market and all the little kiosks basically open up for a few days. And thousands of people, tens of thousands of people come to La Foire Gourmande to taste local foods from the different restaurants and little agricultural places around town, but also from many other places in Quebec too. So if you're there during La Foire Gourmande, I really recommend going because you can taste stuff and it's really cheap and there's a lot of free tastings as well. And they have cooking classes and stuff. So although it's a French-speaking festival, the people there will be able to explain all their food to you. And that will be a good way to taste some local mushrooms or all kinds of stuff that you might not find in the bigger cities on the rest of your road trip.
Okay.
So enough festivals. Let's go for what's there year long. Most of the things in Témiscamingue are open during the summer. And that's one thing I didn't mention yet. But you can go any time of the year to the region. But it's mainly for the nature stuff that it's open in the winter, for example. So the tourist season with all these little cool little historical places will be from June, generally the end of June. On the 24th of June, we have our Saint-Jean-Baptiste, which is our national holiday in the province.
And that's the feast day of Saint John the Baptist?
Saint-Jean-Baptiste, yeah. For us, there's no religious meaning any longer. It used to be a religious day for St. John the Baptist, like you said, but nowadays it's just basically our day off where people have bonfires and there's a lot of music and festivals in every town. So it's just a cool day to be all together as Quebecers. And no matter where you are in Quebec, something's going to be happening on the 24th.
And that's around the 24th of June?
It's always on the 24th on the dot. Some festivities are on the 23rd at night.
Okay.
And some are on the 24th at night. So it depends. So you can even move around and have 2 nights of festivities depending on where you are because it happens on the 23rd or 24th.
Okay.
And this is the opening of the tourist season in Quebec in a lot of rural regions.
Wow, that's late.
It is late, but don't worry. If you're there earlier, certain things are open. It's just the smaller places rely a lot on students. So the students finish school, like high schoolers finish on the 20th or something of June. So depending on the year and the calendar, obviously. So they can only start working around Saint-Jean-Baptiste. So that kind of explains why most places open on those dates because they get their workers and employees. And that also explains why most things will close end of August because the kids are going back to school. So
I've been to Eastern Canada. I think it was PEI in the first week of September and was surprised how many tourism places were closed for the season.
It's for the same reason, basically.
And it was just after Labor Day. It was almost immediately in September. And all done.
Unfortunately, that's what happens. And Abitibi-Témiscamingue is like not an exception. It's anywhere you go. Obviously, in cities, things are going to remain
Right.
open year long. I talked about Rouyn-Noranda and the museum there
Mm-hmm.
and the Cité de l'Art. It's open all year long. But the smaller places that are a bit more community driven will have a harder time staying open all year. So I would definitely recommend visiting between June and September for more accessibility to everything. Although in Témiscamingue, there's really good places to go in the winter, but you're going to be snowmobiling and you're going to be fat biking and you're going to be outside and playing in nature and playing in snow. A different experience from the truck rodeo that I spoke about earlier. Or there's a tugboat that you can visit as well. It's called T.E. Draper. It's in the era of log drivers I was talking about. So it's one of the largest timber tugboats that sailed on the lake there. And it started in I think it's 1929, if I remember correctly. And it was right up to the 70s. So it was used. And today it's right on the ground. And you can visit the tugboat and the little museum that's beside it. And there's also not too far away the reconstruction of a forest camp. So you get to see these people that were running on the logs I was telling you about earlier, how they lived and what a camp looked like, because it was very rustic. I can tell you that. It was quite a life. These people are heroes in my book, but to each their own, as they say nowadays. I don't think a lot of 18-year-olds would sign up to go to the forest camp, but because of them, we exist today. It's a really cool thing to see in Anglier. So Angliers, if I were to translate it, it's the little town that the tugboat is in. So that's a cool thing to see as well. I touched on the whole foodie festival, and there's a reason for that. Témiscamingue is very foodie. There's not as many restaurants as in the other towns I talked about, but they have a lot of foodie destinations. So whether it's for honey, for example, or even a winery on an island. So there's the Domaine des Ducs winery. So des Ducs Domaine winery. It's a winery on an island. That's just having a winery in Témiscamingue is pretty impressive because you're quite north for wine. So just them managing to make wine is impressive in itself. And then you have the whole visit where you can see what they do, and that's pretty cool too. Or you can go to the honey maker and taste stuff. Whether you're staying for a few days or just one day, the place you have to go to is l'Eden Rouge or Red Eden. It's a restaurant that's actually a farm. It started off as a farm specializing in tomatoes, which is weird because that's you think of Italy when you think of tomatoes. You don't think of Témiscamingue, obviously. But they grow all kinds of stuff, whether it's cucumbers and lettuce and tomatoes. Nowadays, they have all kinds of stuff. But l'Eden Rouge, or Red Eden, is a farm-to-table restaurant. So it's not necessarily about visiting a farm, but it's about tasting local foods in a really... I would give it like a 5-star for the food. It's really good. I think it's one of the best restaurants in the whole Abitibi-Témiscamingue region. And it's presented in sustainable ways. And they explain to you the history of what you're eating, basically, and also who made it. And if it's not from l'Eden Rouge, they'll explain, oh, this is the honey from this place, and this is the wine from this place. And so you'll get a feel of the region as well just by eating there, and maybe discover new places you want to visit, because obviously I can't talk about everything in this podcast.
Okay.
There's also le fromage au village, which translates to the cheese in the village. In Lorrainville, so Laurenville, there's the curd cheese. So it's a cheesemaker that makes really good curd cheese. So if you want to taste, because we do eat it on its own, right? It's on poutine, like we said earlier, but that squeaky curd cheese is a really good snack. Like typical road trip for Quebecers, we buy some curd cheese. It needs to be warm. If it's in the fridge, it's ruined. It's got to be on the counter at the corner store. And it's warm, and you
Although
eat this...
they do ship, I should say, and there's no delivery charges. But it's not, you're saying don't do it.
I'm not saying don't do it because it's going to be good anyways, and it's probably going to be better curd cheese than anywhere else outside of Quebec because I'm allowed to brag. But it's always better when it's fresh. Curd cheese, you really want to grab the morning it was prepared, or at the corner store when it's been there for 2 or 3 days maximum, but it's not as good. You're not going to get sick or anything, but it's not as nice and squeaky and good if it's not fresh. So if you want to grab some fresh cheese, I would definitely recommend stopping at Le Fromage au Village before moving on to the next site, which will once again bring us back to Hudson's Bay Company and fur traders. It's called Obadjiwan Fort Témiscamingue. So it's basically National Historic Site. It's where there used to be the fort that would protect the Europeans in trading times.
Mm-hmm.
Protect from what? I don't know, because I think the winters killed them more than anything else. But hey, you had to think you were more important back in the days than the Indigenous communities. But it ended up being a place where, yes, they traded with the communities. And obviously the fur trading was a big thing. If you've heard of Canadian history, you've heard probably of the Hudson's Bay Company. And so things started off there. And today you get to see why they chose that place. It's on the water, obviously, because you needed water to transport those in a canoe.
Your big Voyager canoe, yeah.
Exactly. But it has a really beautiful view, and you could see why they did that, because you can see almost like I would say like a 220 degree view, because you can't see 360, but it's really impressive to be there and to think back in the day that people will come along in all those canoes. So now you can visit it as a museum, but just walking around, walking in the forest behind it as well. There's a few interpretive panels that you can read, and it's a really cool museum to visit that kind of sums up everything that you've learned about the fur trade in this part of Abitibi-Témiscamingue.
Okay.
And now I promised I would talk about national parks. And before we end this itinerary, I would say at least 1 or 2 days of this week need to be nature focused. No matter what you love to do, Abitibi-Témiscamingue has got it. If it's outside, they've got it. So in the 2 national parks in the region, one is Aiguebelle National Park, and the other one is Opémican. So that's the newest national park. I'll sum this up again, don't worry. I'm just stating there's 2, and these are the names. They're the main ones. So the first one, Aiguebelle, is closer to Rouyn-Noranda. Remember I said it's a good base to explore the park. It's about 45 minutes from Rouyn, so it's not that close because it's a bit remote. But it's a national park that has 2.7 billion-year-old rocks. So it's very important for geology if you're into that. But if you're not, trust me, it's still a beautiful place. And your chances of seeing moose are like incredible. It's the largest concentration in all of Abitibi-Témiscamingue. So if you like seeing animals and you want to go hiking and walking around, you'll probably stumble upon moose. So that's cool too. I don't know if you've ever seen moose up close.
I have.
They're pretty big and impressive.
Yeah.
It's like bigger than a horse in some situations. So it's a really cool thing to see. And in the park, it's possible. There's 30 kilometers of trails, whether you want to go up or just walk around. For every level, it's really easy. So whether you're backcountry hiking and you're an adventurer and you want to hike for 4 days in a row, or you're like me and you just kind of want to walk around on an easy track for the day, that's available in the park too. The park is open mainly in summer with kayaking and canoeing and all kinds of water sports, but there's also cool stuff to do in the winter, like ice climbing. I don't know if you've tried that.
No.
Me neither. I've seen it up close, but I wouldn't try it because, oh my gosh. But yeah, basically people climb ice with a lot of sense of adventure, I have to say. But that's the stuff that you can do in the national park. It's basically like any other national park in the world where nature is the focus, and you can either camp there, do shelter hiking. So basically you'll hike all day and then sleep in one of the shelters, or you can rent rustic camps or even little cabins. You can stay in the park, or you can do an urban nature day and stay in Rouyn-Noranda. So one thing you need to know about our national parks, there's 2 levels of national parks in Quebec. There's the CEPAC, which are the provincial parks. And then there's Parks Canada, which you might be familiar with if you've been to other places in Canada. They're both CEPAC parks. So it's not Parks Canada. It's different. It's on the provincial level. And you need a pass, just like for Parks Canada. So you can get an annual card that's about $50 if you're going to be visiting all kinds of stuff. But if not, the daily access is $9.85. So it's around $10. Canadian, obviously. So for you Americans, it's much cheaper these days. But you pay that and it gives you a right to be in the park for 24 hours.
Okay.
So you definitely need that to visit. Opémican National Park is the second park I wanted to talk about before we end. And it's the newest park. It was actually created in 2018, which is very recent. And it's based around an old logging camp. It's 252 square kilometers, so that's huge. And it has 4 different sectors that you can visit. This is a park that limits access, so you have to make sure that you have the rights to go in it. Not everyone can go in certain sectors, so you have to book your entry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's right on the side of Lake Témiscamingue that I was talking about, that kind of does the border between Quebec and Ontario. And it has everything that you want. It's an impressive park. It's a beautiful place. It's on Anishinaabe land, so Indigenous land. And there's a really big presence. And this park was created in a good way between the community and the politicians that created the park. So it's really cool to see, because a lot of people visit national parks in Quebec and that's their theme for their trips. So if you want to come to the region, there's really Aiguebelle and Opénican are amazing national parks. And like I said, all the sports you can imagine, whether you're a beginner or a big hiker, you'll find something to do.
Excellent.
So that kind of takes us through Abitibi-Témiscamingue. And it's such a big region, so it's easy for me to talk about it another 2-3 hours, but I think we don't have that kind of time. One thing, though, that I want people to keep in mind is that it's far to get there, but once you're there, nothing's far. So it's not as remote as you think, and it's not as complicated to get there as you think. And even Quebecers have that state of mind, which I don't like. And I keep telling people, no, you got to go. It's a really cool region. And it's not like you're not in the countryside all day long. There's cities and towns and cool stuff. So it's a really good mix of urban and nature. And it's, I think, a place that deserves to be seen way more than other places. Obviously, you're going to go to Montreal, Quebec City, Tremblant, the Eastern Townships, and all the other regions are great. But I think this one has something special for especially nature lovers.
Excellent. Anything else we need to know before we get to our wrap-up questions, before we head out?
I would say bring some bug spray. Unfortunately, the reputation of the region is true. There's a lot of bugs in summer, especially like beginning of summer, I would say June, July. But if you have bug spray, you're good. There's self-service in most places, but it can be patchy sometimes. So make sure you're not necessarily relying just on your Google Maps on your phone, for example, or you program it before you leave town to make sure you know where you're going. But you can flag down people. If they see you on the side of the road, they'll tell you where to go. So don't worry about that. You're not going to get lost, but you still need orientation. So I would recommend making sure you have service when you're planning that out.
Yeah, I find downloading maps from maps.me app that will work offline is helpful when I'm in some place where I'm out in the woods.
Yes, and you're going to be in the woods, so you definitely want to know where you're going.
Excellent. As we get to our wrap-up questions, you are standing in the prettiest spot in Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Am I any closer?
Yeah. You just did a B, like an extra B at Abitibi.
Yes, I realize that. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
I would say by a lake, and there could be over 20,000 of them, but I'm by a lake with a coffee or a gin tonic in my hand and just looking at sunset or sunrise on the water and hearing nature around me and maybe eating some pastries or things like that I bought at the local village pastry shop and just enjoying just relaxing and not planning everything out. I think you got to be spontaneous too to really appreciate the region.
One thing that makes you laugh and say only in this region?
I would say how people think, locals think everything is far. So if you're from Rouen or from Amos or from Val d'Or, you're going to be like, oh, I don't go there. It's far, but it's only an hour away. So it's once they're in the region, they tend to stick to their part of town in a way. That makes me laugh every time. I'm like, no, I'm going there today and coming back. It's not far. And people are like, oh, I haven't been there yet. And that's funny.
And if you had to summarize the region in just 3 words, what 3 words would you pick?
Nature, water, and food.
Excellent.
Nature and water go together, but anyways.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Jennifer Doré Dallas from chasingpoutine.ca. And Jennifer, if we wanted to send people to your best post on the region, where are we going to send them?
what to do in Abitibi-Témiscamingue. So basically everything I said today will be summarized in that post. So you can get visuals of the places I talked about as well. And then you can come back to the podcast and take notes and read them on the blog as well.
Excellent. And is that post up yet, or are you going to send it to me?
The non-official version is not up yet, but it's going to be up by the time this comes out.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for, and I'll try it one more time, Abitibi-Témiscamingue.
Oh, you got it perfectly. See, I told you get it by the end.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
McCrispy strips are now at McDonald's. I hope you're ready for the most dippable chicken in McDonald's history. Dip it in all the sauces. Dip it in that hot sauce in your bag. Dip it in your McFlurry. Your dip is your business. McCrispy strips at McDonald's.
Thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. We had a great call last Saturday, our monthly Zoom call. If you're interested in learning more about what you can get by being a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. I had 2 comments about the show that we did last week on Victoria, British Columbia. The first was from Penny, who said, "Hi, Chris, just finished listening to your podcast on Victoria, BC. This episode was especially meaningful to me as I'm a resident of Victoria. I found your episode really interesting and not unlike your other travel episodes. I learned something new. I just wanted to write and tell you that I'm a fan of your show, and I always look forward to listening to your podcast. If you ever come back to Vancouver Island, I would suggest you head up north to Tofino. There are many other amazing places to visit on our island." Penny. Thanks, Penny, and always glad to know that the locals said I didn't screw it up too much. And then I also heard from Bruce, who said, "Hi, Chris, thanks for this podcast on Victoria. I really enjoyed it. We were in Victoria last year, and I wanted to add a few things that people might want to do there. The first is the Abkhazi Garden and Tea House. We've been to the Butch Art Gardens several times and love it, but this is a different type of garden. It is in a mostly residential neighborhood in Victoria and is much smaller, about 1.5 acres, but very well done. A lovely selection of plants nicely arranged on a gentle hillside. The tea house experience is also lovely, a quieter and more intimate place than the Empress Hotel tea room. The food and tea selection is very nice. If you have a few days to explore more of Vancouver Island, I recommend staying in the small town of Duncan, about halfway up the island. Nice town, good food, and a great walking tour of many, many totem poles that are distributed throughout the downtown area. Duncan is a good location to start a driving loop around the central part of the island past Lake Cowichan, down the west coast to the town of Skookie, and back up the east coast with a stop at Niagara Falls. We really wanted to take a seaplane from Vancouver to Victoria, but their luggage capacity is pretty limited, so we ended up taking the ferry, which turned out to be a very pleasant ride. Cheers, Bruce." Thanks, Bruce. Those are things I did not know about. I'd love to explore more of the island sometime in the future, and I did have to wonder when you said Niagara Falls. I thought maybe I was misreading something there. New on the blog are a couple different posts that I wrote about Victoria, one about the restaurants, one about things to do, that has all the pictures of the things that I talked about on the podcast, so you might want to check that out. And then we also have some guest posts, unique things to do in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, and 2 days in Tirana, Albania. So check those out at amateurtraveler.com. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral.